I hear the sound of the courtroom door opening, feel the weight of my footsteps on the cold marble, and at that exact moment, I cross the threshold, something changes in the air. It's as if time is frozen for an instant. All conversations abruptly stop. All papers stop being shuffled. Even the air conditioning seems to have paused its constant hum. The silence that descends is so dense, so heavy that I can hear my own heart beating inside my chest. I walk slowly, each step calculated, my mid-heel shoes making a sound that echoes throughout the entire room. I don't look to the sides, I keep my gaze fixed straight ahead. Focused on the defense table where my lawyer sits with a stack of documents in front of him. But I can literally feel the weight of dozens of eyes on me, following my every move, trying to understand what's happening, why the atmosphere changed so drastically the moment I entered. I'm carrying only a brown leather briefcase worn by time with scratches and marks that tell the tale of decades of use. It's the same briefcase I've carried for 28 years of my career, the same one that held thousands of documents, hundreds of cases, countless life-changing decisions. Inside it now lies only the truth, organized chronologically, each page evidence of the manipulation. I suffered each receipt proof of the money I gave, thinking I was helping my family. My hand grips the handle firmly, without a tremor, without hesitation. I spent months feeling weak, vulnerable, defeated. But today, dressed in this charcoal gray suit I haven't worn in 5 years, with my hair tied in a neat bun, with the discreet framed glasses I used to wear when presiding over hearings, I feel different. I feel like the woman I was before all this began. That's when I hear the noise. A sudden sound of a chair scraping hard against the floor, metal scraping against wood, shattering the deathly silence. I look up and see that the judge is standing. Judge Thomas Harrison, according to the documents I received a week ago when he took the case. He's behind the high bench, that imposing structure of dark mahogany that elevates the judge above everyone else in the room. A visual symbol of judicial authority. But he's not sitting in his leather chair with that formal, distant posture judges often maintain. He's standing fully erect, and his hands are visible on the bench, and I can see even from my distance that they're shaking. His hands tremble as he grips the wooden gavel, that symbolic object that represents his power to maintain order, to dispense justice, to decide the fate of those who appear before his court. His fingers are white from gripping the handle, and the gavel swings slightly in the air, betraying the inner turmoil he's clearly trying to control. His eyes are wide, his pupils dilated, his mouth slightly open, in an expression I recognize instantly because I've seen it hundreds of times throughout my career. It's shock. Pure and utter shock mixed with disbelief, as if he's seeing something his brain refuses to process as real. He stares at me intently, his eyes roaming my face as if searching for something, confirming something, comparing the image before him with a memory long ago filed away in some corner of his mind. And then, after what feels like an eternity but is probably only a few seconds, he opens his mouth. The sound that emerges is low, hoarse, barely audible. But the acoustics of this courtroom are designed to carry every whisper, every breath, every word spoken. So when he speaks, even at a near whisper, every person present can hear him with crystal clarity. It's her, he says, and there's so much weight in those 2 words, so much unspoken history, so much hidden meaning, that the people around him begin to shift uncomfortably. In their seats, sensing they're witnessing something important, but not quite understanding what it is. After all these years, he continues his voice. Still low, but now laced with something that might be reverence, or perhaps fear, or perhaps both mixed together in a complex combination of emotions he can't quite hide. I finally allow my eyes to move toward him slowly and deliberately. I lift my chin, slightly square my shoulders, and look him in the eye. There's no challenge in my gaze, but there's something else. Something he recognizes immediately. It's mutual recognition. It's the silent confirmation that yes, it's me. I am the person he thinks I am, and yes, we really are in this impossible, surreal situation. I see the exact moment reality fully sets in. His face pales even more. He swallows hard, and he has to place his free hand on the countertop to steady himself, as if his legs have suddenly forgotten how to hold a person upright. Across the room, exactly 23 paces from my position, quickly assessing the courtroom's dimensions, sits my daughter-in-law, Jennifer. She's wearing a conservative navy blue dress, the kind of outfit lawyers to advise their clients to wear when they want to appear respectable and trustworthy to the judge. Her hair is tied back in a low ponytail. Her hands are folded delicately on the table in front of her, and next to her sits her attorney, a middle-aged man named Richard Stevens, who charges $400 an hour and has a reputation for being ruthless in custody and restraining order cases. Jennifer saw me come in. Of course she saw me. But for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since this whole situation began spiraling out of control, I see something different on her face. That smug smile she always wears, that expression of barely concealed superiority, that arrogant certainty of someone who thinks they've already won the battle before it even begins. All of it falters for a moment. Her eyes narrow slightly as she watches me, trying to understand what's changed. Why I look so different. Why the judge reacted that way when he saw me. But then, and this is most telling of all, the smile returns. Not completely, not with the same intensity as before, but it returns. She regains her composure, straightens her posture, and there's still that spark in her eyes, that spark of confidence that comes from someone who's played this game long enough to believe they know all the rules and all the possible outcomes. She thinks she knows what's going to happen today. She thinks this is just another formal procedure, another step in the process that will eventually result in me being legally barred from coming near her or my own children. She thinks the money she took from me, the nearly $200,000 I transferred into her accounts over 3 years, is safe and forgotten, just an irrelevant detail in a much larger narrative she's constructed about an obsessive and dangerous mother-in-law. She has no idea what's about to happen. And watching her now, seeing that unshakable confidence, I'm almost tempted to feel sorry for her, because the truth inside this brown leather folder, the truth I'm about to lay on that table, won't just change the course of this particular case. It will completely and irreversibly destroy the carefully constructed narrative that has turned my life into a nightmare for the past few months. It will expose lies she's told not only to the justice system, but to my own son, to neighbors, to friends, to anyone who will listen. It will reveal a pattern of behavior so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that even her own lawyer will begin to question who exactly he's defending. I keep walking until I finally reach the defense table. My attorney, Robert Miller, a young man of 32, who still has the idealistic energy of someone who graduated from law school only 7 years ago, stands as I approach. He pulls out my chair for me, a gentlemanly gesture I appreciate even if it's not necessary. I sit down, slowly place my briefcase on the table in front of me, smooth my skirt, cross my legs at the ankle, and then, for the first time since entering this room, allow my eyes to fully scan the room. The courtroom is fuller than I expected. Restraining order proceedings don't usually draw crowds. The relatively private matters, family matters that most people prefer to resolve out of the public eye. But apparently word has spread about this particular case. There are reporters in the back rows. I recognize at least 2 of them from local publications. There are neighbors of Jennifer and David, people who have likely come to testify or simply to watch the drama unfold. There are even some people I don't recognize, anonymous faces who might be here for any number of reasons, or no reason at all, just people who decided to spend the afternoon watching other people's courtroom dramas. My gaze eventually finds my son. David sits 3 rows behind Jennifer, not next to her as I would have expected, but behind, maintaining a physical distance that perhaps reflects some emotional distance that has begun to develop. He is 37 now, but this moment he looks older, much older. There are deep lines around his eyes that weren't there 2 years ago. His hair, once a uniform dark brown, now has gray streaks at the temples. He's lost weight. I can see it even from a distance. His shoulders seem narrower within the suit he's wearing. His cheeks are slightly sunken. When our eyes meet, he doesn't smile, but he doesn't immediately look away either. There's something in his expression, something that might be conflict or guilt or maybe just deep exhaustion. Judge Harrison bangs his gavel 3 times, the sound echoing through the room and effectively silencing the few whispered conversations that were still taking place. All eyes turn to him waiting. He clears his throat, puts on the reading glasses that were on the bench, picks up the stack of documents in front of him, and for a long moment simply stares at the papers without actually reading anything. I can see his mind working, processing, trying to figure out how to proceed in a situation that clearly caught him completely off guard. Court is in session. He finally says, his voice now firmer, regaining that tone of formal authority that judges cultivate over years of practice. We are here today for the final hearing in the case of Jennifer Marie Carter versus Margaret Elizabeth Carter, case number 347892. He pauses, and there is the slightest hesitation before he pronounces my full name, Margaret Elizabeth Carter. That anyone paying attention, anyone familiar with the history of this region's justice system over the past 30 years, anyone who worked in these courtrooms during the 80s, 90s, and 2000 will recognize that name immediately when combined with my face, my age, and the details of the case. Because Margaret Elizabeth Carter is my maiden name, the name I reverted to when I retired 5 years ago, deliberately severing ties with my previous professional identity. But for 28 years, for nearly 3 decades of my adult life, I wasn't known by that name. I was known as Justice Margaret Elizabeth Thornton. Not just any judge. I was a justice of the New York State Supreme Court, one of only 3 women to hold that position in the state's history at one. At that time, one of the most respected and occasionally feared voices in the state's judicial system. My name appeared in hundreds of court decisions. My face appeared in newspapers, law journals, and news broadcasts. I presided over some of the most important and controversial cases of the last generation, cases that set precedents, changed laws, and affected the lives of millions. Young lawyers studied my decisions in law school. Prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared their arguments knowing they would eventually have to present them in my courtroom. And younger judges, people like Thomas Harrison, learned their craft by observing how I conducted my courtroom, how I questioned witnesses, how I analyzed evidence, how I applied the law with precision and, when possible, compassion. I retired in January of 2018, a few months before my 60th birthday. Technically, I was still young enough to continue for another 10-15 years if I wanted. But I was tired. Tired of the constant political pressure, the impossible decisions where every choice you make will destroy someone, the occasional threats from people dissatisfied with sentences, the necessary security, the constant public life. I wanted peace. I wanted privacy. I wanted time to just be a grandmother, to enjoy my family, to live the rest of my life outside the relentless spotlight that comes with a position of that level. So I quietly retired, turned down the elaborate retirement parties they wanted, refused the interviews reporters requested, legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, changed my phone number, closed my social media accounts, and effectively disappeared from public life. Only a very small circle of people knew where I was and what I was doing. My son David knew, of course, but I specifically asked him not to mention my professional past to Jennifer. Not because I was embarrassed, but because I wanted her to know. Me as a person, as a mother-in-law, as a grandmother, not as an intimidating authority figure with decades of experience. Dismantling lies and manipulation. Now, sitting in this courtroom, I realized that this decision to keep my identity secret was both a blessing and a curse. It was a curse because Jennifer completely underestimated me. She saw me as just a lonely, retired old woman with a lot of money and no life of her own, an easy target for her manipulations. She had no idea she was playing chess against someone who had spent nearly 3 decades learning to recognize every possible manipulation tactic, every type of lie, every pattern of abusive behavior. But it was also a blessing because her underestimation gave me time to document everything to build an absolutely solid case to prepare my defense without her realizing what I was doing. Mr. Harrison, I say, my voice cutting through the room, clearly loud enough to be heard, but not loud enough to sound aggressive, exactly the tone I've learned to use over decades of legal practice. Before we begin the formal proceedings of this hearing, I'd like to request permission to present additional evidence not included in the preliminary filings. My attorney, who clearly wasn't expecting me to speak, turns to me with wide eyes. We discussed strategy last night, and the plan was to let him do all the arguing, while I remained silent, the sympathetic victim who just wanted to see her grandchildren. But that's not the game I'm playing anymore. Judge Harrison looks at me for a long moment. I can see the conflict on his face, the internal struggle over how to proceed. He knows me. He knows who I am. But he also knows he can't give preferential treatment just because of our shared history. It would be unethical, possibly illegal, certainly grounds for appeal if he demonstrated any bias. "What kind of evidence, Ms. Carter?" he finally asks, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "Complete financial records," I respond immediately. "Documentation of all monetary transfers between myself and Ms. Jennifer Carter over the past 5 years. Copies of emails, text messages, and recordings of conversations that demonstrate the context of these transfers. Statements from witnesses who can speak to Ms. Carter's pattern of behavior not only with me but with other family members." I pause for a moment, letting the weight of my words settle. "And also, I would like to present documentation from a previous case involving Ms. Carter and her own mother, a case very similar to this one, that was settled out of court in 2015. The courtroom falls completely silent. Jennifer, who had been leaning back in her chair with the relaxed posture of someone without a care in the world, suddenly straightens up. Her lawyer whispers something urgent in her ear. Across the room, I see David put his hand over his mouth, his eyes widening as he processes what I've just said. He didn't know about the affair with Jennifer's mother. Of course he didn't know. Jennifer would never have told him. It's just like she never told him about so many other things. Judge Harrison places his glasses on the bench and rubs his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, a gesture of someone trying to process too much information too quickly. "Was this evidence properly shared with the other side during the discovery phase?" he asks. And it's a legitimate question because procedural rules require both sides to have access to all evidence before the hearing. "It was shared a week ago," I reply calmly. "Complete copies were delivered to Ms. Carter's attorney on September 27th. He has had more than enough time to review it and prepare a response." Jennifer's lawyer stands, his chair making that same scraping sound against the floor that the judge's chair made minutes ago. His face is flushed, and I can see a vein pulsing in his forehead. "Your Honor," he begins, and his voice has that slightly shrill quality of someone trying to sound indignant, but is actually just nervous. "This so-called evidence is clearly an attempt at defamation of character. It has no direct relevance to the case at hand, which is simply about whether or not Mrs. Margaret Carter poses a threat to the well-being of my client and her family. Financial history is irrelevant. The alleged case involving my client's mother, which I should mention was resolved amicably and completely legally, has no place in this court." Judge Harrison looks at him with an expression I recognize well because it's the same expression I used to use when lawyers attempted particularly weak arguments in my court. It's a mixture of incredulity and mild disappointment, as if he's personally offended that anyone would think he'd be naive enough to accept that line of reasoning. "Mr. Stevens," he says, and there's a sharp edge to his voice now. "In a case involving allegations of harassment and obsessive behavior, the pattern of the relationship between the parties is absolutely relevant. Ms. Carter can demonstrate that. There was a significant financial relationship that was abruptly severed. That speaks directly to the power dynamics and motivations at play. As for the previous case, if it demonstrates a similar pattern of behavior by your client, then it is definitely admissible." Motion denied. "Ms. Carter, you may proceed with presenting your evidence." I open the brown leather folder and begin pulling out documents. There are many of them meticulously organized in colored tabs, each section clearly labeled, each page numbered. I pass the first few sets to my attorney, who still seems a bit dazed by the turn things have taken, but quickly recovers and begins distributing copies to the judge and the prosecution table. As the papers are distributed, I begin to speak, my voice clear and methodical, presenting the facts as I would any legal argument. My relationship with Jennifer Marie Carter began in May of 2017. I began. At that time, she had been dating my son, David Alexander Carter, for about 8 months. They met at a technology conference in San Francisco where my son worked as a senior software engineer and Jennifer worked in marketing for a startup. During the first few months of their relationship, my meetings with Jennifer were infrequent but positive. She seemed genuinely interested in getting to know my son's family, asked questions about our history, and seemed respectful and polite. I paused to give the judge time to find the relevant documents in the stack in front of him. The first significant event, I continue, occurred in October of 2017, when David informed me that he and Jennifer were engaged and planning a wedding for the following year. I was genuinely happy for them and offered to contribute to the wedding expenses. What began as an offer to pay for the cake and flowers quickly escalated when Jennifer began sharing her vision for a larger, more elaborate wedding. I turned to the first tab in my folder marked with a blue label that says Wedding 2018, Your Honor. If you look at Section 1 of the distributed documents, you will find detailed bank transfers totaling $45,250. These were all the contributions I made to David and Jennifer's wedding over the 6 months between December of 2017 and May of 2018. They include payments for the venue, the caterer, the photographer, the flower, girl dresses, the groom's tuxedo, the flowers, the decorations, and the 2-week honeymoon in Maui. I watched the judge scan the documents, his eyes moving quickly over the columns of numbers, checking the dates, confirming the amounts. Every transfer is clearly documented with bank statements, every amount matching exactly what I'm saying. There's no room for dispute on the basic facts. $45,000, the judge murmurs almost to himself, his finger tracing one of the lines on the paper. For a wedding. Jennifer told me she'd dreamed of that wedding since she was a child. I continued, and my voice remained neutral, just stating facts without visible emotion. She said her own parents couldn't contribute, that they'd struggled financially and could barely pay their own bills. She said that without help, they would have to do something very simple, perhaps just at the registry office with a few witnesses, and that it would be devastating for her not to have the wedding she'd always wanted. I, wanting to make my son happy and genuinely believing if I was helping build a positive relationship with my future daughter-in-law, agreed to pay. The wedding took place in June of 2018 at a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was beautiful. Jennifer was radiant. David was happy. I was proud and excited to see my son begin this new chapter in his life. During her speech at the reception, Jennifer thanked me publicly, called me her second mother, and said she felt blessed to have me in her life. I believed her. Every word. I truly believed we were building a strong and loving family relationship. I turned to the next tab in the folder, this one marked in green, with the label Post-Wedding, 2018 to 2019. In the months following the wedding, I continued, David and Jennifer moved into a house in Westchester, New York. It was a modest but comfortable home, 3 bedrooms, a small backyard in a safe neighborhood, with good schools for the children they planned to have. I visited regularly, usually once or twice a week, always bringing something. Sometimes just a homemade dinner, sometimes small gifts. For the house, cookbooks, decorative candles, little things I thought they would appreciate. It was during this period that Jennifer began casually mentioning financial difficulties. David's salary as a software engineer was good, around $95,000 a year at the time, and Jennifer's salary as a marketing coordinator was around $60,000. They weren't wealthy, but for a young couple without children, yet it should have been more than enough. But Jennifer always mentioned how expensive things were, how high the mortgage payment was, how their cars needed maintenance, how they were trying to save but never managed. And I, like an idiot, began offering help. Sometimes it was small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, to help with a particularly high electric bill or an unexpected repair. But gradually, the requests, though never explicitly called requests, grew larger. Your Excellency, if you look at Section 2, you will find a spreadsheet detailing 23 separate transfers between July of 2018 and December of 2019, totaling $32,800. Jennifer's lawyer stands again. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. Ms. Carter is trying to paint my client as some kind of financial manipulator, when clearly these were voluntary gifts from a generous mother-in-law. There's nothing illegal or even ethically questionable about accepting family gifts. Judge Harrison doesn't even look at him. Mr. Stevens, if I have to ask you to sit down one more time, I'll start considering sanctions for repeated interruptions. The lawyer blushes, but sits mumbling an apology. You're right, I say, calmly turning my attention back to the judge. Mr. Stevens, it's absolutely correct that there's nothing illegal about giving gifts to family members. And at that moment, I definitely saw those gifts as gifts given freely out of love and a desire to help. The problem isn't the gifts themselves. The problem is the pattern that developed, and especially what happened when the gifts suddenly stopped being enough. I turn to the next section, marked in yellow. Birth of Jacob and Emma, 2019 to 2021. My first grandson, Jacob Michael Carter, was born in March 2019. It was one of the happiest days of my life. I was there at the hospital when he was born. I held that baby in my arms just an hour after he came into the world, and I felt my heart overflow with love. For the first few months, I was incredibly involved. Jennifer had decided to take 6 months of maternity leave, and during that time I visited her 3 or 4 times a week to help. I changed diapers, bathed the baby, prepared bottles, cleaned the house while Jennifer rested, and cooked meals so she and David wouldn't have to worry about it. I thought I was being helpful, that I was easing the burden of new parents who were clearly overwhelmed and exhausted. Jennifer always thanked me, always saying she didn't know what she would do without me. But gradually, I began to notice subtle changes. She would start making comments about how I held Jacob, saying it wasn't the right way, even though I'd raised my own son perfectly well. She criticized the temperature of the bottles I prepared, even when I followed her instructions exactly. She complained about me rocking Jacob to sleep when he cried, saying it was creating bad habits and that he needed to learn to soothe himself. Each visit began to bring more and more rules, a growing list of things I couldn't do, ways I couldn't interact with my own grandson. I paused, allowing some emotion to enter my voice for the first time. It was confusing and painful. I was giving her thousands of dollars, dedicating countless hours of my time to helping with the baby, and yet I was constantly criticized and corrected. But I convinced myself it was just new mom stress, that Yuma was trying to find her own way in motherhood, and that eventually things would work out. Things got worse when Jennifer became pregnant for the second time. Emma Rose Carter was born in September 2021, and this time Jennifer set strict rules from the start. I could only visit on specific days, Tuesdays and Thursdays, from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. If I arrived late, the door wouldn't be opened. If I tried to stay past the allotted time, Jennifer would start yawning and say she was tired and needed me to leave. I turned to the next section in the folder, this one marked in red, 2022 Escalation and Disruption. It was during this year that things really began to unravel. Jennifer discovered she was pregnant again with her third child, Michael. But she wasn't happy with the news. She said their house was too small for 3 children, that they needed a bigger house, but that they couldn't afford a down payment on a more expensive property. I, in my infinite naivete, immediately offered assistance. I transferred $80,000 from my savings account directly to David and Jennifer's joint account. $80,000 I had carefully saved over decades. Your Excellency, if you look at page 15 of Section 4, you will find the bank confirmation of this transfer dated April 15, 2022. With this money plus some savings, they had David and Jennifer bought a 4-bedroom house in a more remote neighborhood. It was a beautiful house, I must admit. A large backyard, a modern kitchen, and spacious bedrooms. I was happy to be able to help my son and daughter-in-law provide a better home for my grandchildren. I also helped with the move, painted one of the nurseries that would be the babies, and bought new furniture for several rooms. I spent another $15,000 between May and June of 2022 on various expenses related to the new house. And then 3 weeks after they moved in, Jennifer called me. The call took place on July 11th, 2022 at 3:27 p.m. I know the exact time because we checked the phone records, which are included on page 22. The conversation lasted 7 minutes and 43 seconds. During this call, Jennifer informed me that she and David needed space, that I was being too present in the children's lives, and that they needed to learn to depend on their parents, not their grandmother. She said it would only be for a few weeks, maybe a few months, just until they adjusted to their new home. My voice trembles slightly here, and I don't try to hide it. I let the judge and everyone in the room see the real emotional impact that moment had on me. Those weeks turned into months. I called, she didn't answer. I texted, she responded with vague excuses. The kids are sick. We're very busy. This isn't a good time. I tried to talk to my son David, but he always sided with Jennifer, always saying I needed to respect her wishes as the children's mother. In December of 2022, after almost 5 months without seeing my grandchildren, I decided to take Christmas presents to their house. It was December 25th, Christmas Day, and I thought that surely on this day they would allow me to see the children, even if only for a few minutes. I drove to the house I had helped by carrying gifts I had bought and carefully wrapped for each of my 3 grandchildren. Jennifer opened the door, and when she saw it was me, the smile on her face instantly disappeared. "What are you doing here?" she asked, blocking the entrance with her body. I explained that I had come to see my grandchildren for Christmas, that I had presents for them. She looked at the gifts in my hands, then back at my face, and said something I'll never forget. She said, "I asked you to give us space, Margaret. You don't respect boundaries. The kids are fine without you. Maybe you should just accept that and move on with your life." And then she closed the door in my face. I stood there on the porch of the house I had helped buy with $80,000 of my own money, holding gifts that would never be delivered on. Christmas Day, tears streaming down my face. That was the most humiliating and painful moment of my life. Worse than any difficult decision I had to make as a judge. Worse than burying my husband. 20 years ago, worse than anything else I had ever experienced. I take a deep breath, regaining my composure. In February of 2023, I received legal documents. Jennifer was suing me for harassment and invasion of privacy. She alleged that I had shown up at their house unannounced multiple times, that I was stalking her on social media, and that I was sending threatening messages. Your Honor, if you look at Section 5, you will find copies of every message I sent to Jennifer during the period in question. There are 17 messages over the course of 5 months. Not a single one of them could reasonably be construed as threatening or obsessive. They were simply polite requests to see my grandchildren. You'll also find my call records for Jennifer and David during this period. 11 calls in 5 months. Compare that to the hundreds of calls Jennifer claimed in her original petition. The evidence simply doesn't support her claims. As for the social media stalking allegations, I barely use social media. I have a Facebook account that I rarely access, and the records show that I viewed Jennifer's public profile exactly 3 times in 6 months. Not the dozens of times she claims. The judge is studying the documents carefully now, making occasional notes. I can see his expression growing more serious as he compares Jennifer's claims with the actual evidence. What about the witnesses Mrs. Jennifer Carter presented? He asks, the ones who claim to have seen you around their house frequently. I smile slightly. Your Honor, if you turn to Section 6, you'll find something interesting. After I received Jennifer's petition with her allegations, I hired a private investigator to interview these same neighbors. With their permission, these interviews were recorded. In the audio, which is transcribed for your convenience, you'll hear 3 of the 4 neighbors admit that they never actually saw me do anything threatening. One of them specifically says that Jennifer asked him to sign a statement alleging concerning behavior, but that all he actually saw was my car parked on the street once or twice, something completely normal for a grandmother visiting family. The fourth neighbor, a woman named Patricia Morrison, is more interesting. She was the only one who made specific allegations about my alleged erratic behavior. But we did learn something revealing about Ms. Morrison. She owes Jennifer $25,000. There is an unsecured loan agreement between them, dated January. Launtinling Arsha R., Your Honor can find a copy on page 42. Ms. Morrison was under significant financial pressure and had clear motive to testify favorably for Jennifer. Jennifer is pale now. I see it out of the corner of my eye. Her lawyer is furiously leafing through the documents, clearly searching for something that might refute what I'm presenting, but he won't find it. Because everything I'm saying is meticulously documented, every claim supported by solid evidence, every allegation verifiable. I've spent 3 decades learning exactly how to build a case that can't be overturned. But there's more. I'll continue. Section 7 contains information about a very similar earlier case. In 2015, Jennifer's mother, Linda Marie Hayes, sued Jennifer under nearly identical circumstances. Mrs. Hayes had given Jennifer approximately $55,000 over 2 years to help with various expenses. When Mrs. Hayes began to question where the money was going and tried to establish more regular communication with Jennifer, she was suddenly cut off. When she tried to re-establish contact, Jennifer sued her for harassment. The case was eventually settled out of court with Ms. Hayes agreeing to pay Jennifer an additional $1,500 and sign a non-disclosure agreement in exchange for Jennifer's withdrawal of the LAWSUITMs. Hayes, now 73 and living in Oregon, provided a sworn statement describing the events. This statement is included in her court documents. She also authorized the release of sealed financial documents from the previous case, which clearly demonstrate the pattern. The judge lifts his head, his eyes meeting mine. Mrs. Carter, he says, and there's something different in his voice now, something that sounds almost like pent-up anger. You're alleging that Ms. Jennifer Carter has an established pattern of accepting substantial money from family members, then cutting off contact, and then suing those people when they try to maintain a relationship. Not alleging, Your Honor, I respond calmly. I'm demonstrating with documented evidence. And there's more. Section 8 contains emails between Jennifer and a friend of hers, a woman named Rebecca Thompson. These emails were obtained legally through the discovery process, as they were on a work server at the company where Jennifer worked. In the emails, Jennifer explicitly discusses her strategy of extracting as much money as possible from me before cutting me off completely. In an email dated March 2022, approximately a month before I transferred the $80,000, Jennifer writes verbatim, and I quote, "The old lady is completely fixated on the grandkids. I think I can get another 80 or 100,000 before I'm done with this. David won't question anything. He's very controlled. And even if she gets upset later, what will she do? Sue us? She'll never risk losing access to her grandkids. It's the perfect game." The silence that follows my words is absolute and dense. I can hear someone choking in the back rows. I see David put his head in his hands. Jennifer is white as a sheet, her lips moving but no sound coming out. Her lawyer looks like he's been hit by a train. Judge Harrison slams the papers down on the table with more force than necessary. "Mr. Stevens," he says, his voice as cold as ice, "would your client like to respond to any of this evidence?" Jennifer's lawyer slowly stands up, and I can see he's in complete panic. "Your Honor," he stammers, I would need time to consult with my client about these documents. Some of them I hadn't seen before last week, and there's clearly context that ER is missing." Context, the judge repeats, and there's utter disbelief in his voice. What possible context would justify his client explicitly discussing a financial extraction strategy in emails? What context explains the identical pattern with her own mother? What context makes it acceptable to accept nearly $200,000 from someone and then sue her when she asks to see her grandchildren? Jennifer finally finds her voice. She stands up abruptly, knocking over her chair in the process. "This is a lie," she screams, pointing at me. She twisted everything. These emails were taken completely out of context. I have never ever manipulated anyone. She's obsessed, she's sick, she can't accept normal boundaries. Mrs. Carter, the judge says, his voice sharp. Sit down immediately or I will have you removed from the room. Jennifer doesn't sit down. Instead, she turns to David, who is still sitting with his head in his hands. David, she says, her voice rising in panic, tell them what your mother is like. How she always interfered in everything. How she never respected our privacy. How she was trying to control our lives. David lifts his head slowly. His eyes are red, his face is pale, and when he speaks, his voice is so low I can barely hear. Jennifer, he says, and there's something broken in the way he pronounces her name. I read the emails. My mother's investigator gave me copies 3 days ago. I read them all. He pauses, swallowing hard. You told me we needed this money. You said it was to give our children a better future. You cried when you talked about how hard it was financially. And all along, you were just using her, using me, using our children as tools in some sick game. Jennifer is shaking now. This isn't true, she whispers, but there's no conviction in her voice. I love you, David. I love our children. Everything I did was to protect our family from her. She was becoming too involved, too controlling. You accepted $80,000 for the house 3 weeks before you cut contact with her. David says, and his voice is getting stronger now, anger seeping into it. $80,000, Jennifer. And in the emails you're laughing about it, bragging to your friend about how easy it was to manipulate a lonely old woman. Order, Judge Harrison shouts, banging his gavel repeatedly. Order this court, Mr. Carter. I understand this is emotionally difficult, but I need you to maintain your composure or I will have to ask you to leave. David nods, sitting back down, but keeping his eyes fixed on Jennifer, and there's so much hatred in that look that even I feel uncomfortable. The judge turns to me. Mrs. Carter, he says, and now there's something different in his tone, something that almost sounds like respect, perhaps even admiration. You have built an extremely comprehensive case. The evidence you have presented not only completely refutes the allegations against you, but demonstrates a clear pattern of fraudulent behavior on the part of Ms. Jennifer Carter. I am prepared to issue a ruling immediately. He picks up his gavel, holds it for a moment, and then speaks in that formal voice judges use when making official pronouncements. This court completely and utterly denies the request for a restraining order against Margaret Elizabeth Carter. Furthermore, this court finds that the allegations made by Mrs. Jennifer Carter were not only unfounded but knowingly false and malicious. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Margaret Carter not only poses no threat to Mrs. Jennifer Carter or her children, but was in fact the victim of a deliberate scheme of financial and emotional manipulation. He pauses, letting his words sink in, then continues. This court orders Mrs. Jennifer Carter to immediately establish a regular visitation schedule allowing Mrs. Margaret Carter reasonable access to her grandchildren. This schedule must allow for a minimum of 2 3-hour visits per week on mutually agreed upon days and times beginning immediately. Additionally, Mrs. Margaret Carter will be entitled to participate in important events in the children's lives, including but not limited to birthdays, holidays, and school performances. Further, he continues, his voice growing even harder. This court is referring this case to the New York State Attorney General's Office for investigation into possible fraud, extortion, and perjury. The emails presented as evidence clearly suggest criminal intent, and the similarities to the previous case involving Ms. Jennifer Carter's mother indicate a pattern of behavior that deserves full criminal scrutiny. Finally, this court orders Mrs. Jennifer Carter to pay full restitution to Mrs. Margaret Carter in the amount of $183,700 plus interest calculated from the dates of the respective transfers plus all legal costs incurred by Mrs. Margaret Carter in defending against this frivolous and malicious lawsuit. Full payment must be made within 90 days, or Mrs. Margaret Carter will be entitled to place a lien on all marital assets of David and Jennifer Carter, including but not limited to the Westchester property. He bangs the gavel one last time. Closed. Hearing concluded. The chaos that erupts afterward is surreal. Jennifer is screaming, her lawyer is trying to calm her, while simultaneously gathering up her papers with trembling hands. Reporters are rushing out of the room, presumably to start writing their stories. People are whispering excitedly, pointing at me, at Jennifer, trying to process everything they've just witnessed. I simply sit calmly, closing my brown leather briefcase, allowing a small smile to touch the corners of my mouth. It's not a smile of joy or celebration. It's a smile of relief. Relief that finally, the truth has come out. Relief that I can see my grandchildren again. Relief that David now knows the full extent of his wife's manipulation. My lawyer is looking at me like I'm an alien creature. "Mrs. Carter," he says, his voice filled with admiration and a little fear. "In 7 years of practicing law, I've never seen anything like this. The way you built this case, the way you presented the evidence was simply masterful. I have to ask, do you have legal experience, because this was professional prosecutorial work?" I smile at him. Let's just say I had a previous career that taught me the importance of meticulous documentation and clear presentation of evidence. He opens his mouth as if to ask another question, but then thinks better of it and just nods, clearly deciding that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Judge Harrison has asked to see me in his office. I follow a court officer down a long, narrow hallway to a heavy oak door bearing a plaque that reads, "Justice Thomas Harrison." The officer knocks, hears a muffled response, and opens the door, motioning me in. The chambers are exactly as I remember judges' chambers to be. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with legal books, a massive desk covered with papers, neatly stacked diplomas and certifications lining the walls, and a large window overlooking the city's financial district. Judge Harrison stands behind the desk, having removed his black robe, now wearing only a white shirt and navy tie. When I walk in and the door closes behind me, he simply stares at me for a long moment. "Judge Thornton," he finally says, and hearing that title again after all these years creates a strange feeling in my chest, a mixture of nostalgia and discomfort. I had to sit in that courtroom today and pretend I didn't know who you were. I had to pretend I was seeing the evidence for the first time, that I was coming to independent conclusions. But when I saw your name in the case, when I realized it was you being accused of harassment and obsessive behavior, I knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. "Appreciate that, Judge Harrison," I respond calmly. But I want to make it clear that I neither expected nor asked for any special treatment based on who I was. All I wanted was a fair trial based on real evidence. He shakes his head vigorously. "And that's exactly what you got. Judge, that case you built would have won in any court with any competent judge. The evidence was incontrovertible. The pattern of behavior was obvious. The malicious intent was documented in the author's own emails." He pauses, rubbing his face with his hands. But I can admit that knowing her history, knowing her character personally, made me examine Ms. Jennifer Carter's evidence with extra careful scrutiny. And the more I examined it, the clearer it became that she had built an entire case on lies. "Thank you," I say, simply because there's not much more to say. "So we need to talk about what happens next," he says, his voice growing more serious. "You realize this is going to be news, right? Former Supreme Court Justice exposes manipulative daughter-in-law. The media will love this story. There will be reports, probably interview requests, a lot of attention that I imagine you'd rather avoid." I sigh. I know, and honestly, I'm not excited about the prospect. I retired specifically to escape the spotlight. But if the publicity helps others in similar situations recognize signs of family manipulation and seek help, then maybe it's worth it. He smiles, and it's a genuine, warm smile. "That's very typical of you. Always thinking about how your actions can help others. It's one of the things I've always admired about you." He pauses, then adds more quietly, "You were a mentor to half the judges and prosecutors working in the state today. We all learned from watching how you ran your court, how you treated people, how you balanced law and justice. Having to sit there and watch you be treated that way, accused of those things, was one of the most difficult professional experiences I've ever had. I appreciate that more than I can say. I honestly say, and I thank you for maintaining your integrity, for not giving me preferential treatment just because you knew me. That meant a lot. He nods, then returns to his desk and pulls a business card from a drawer. This is the contact information for the prosecutor who will be investigating the case against Ms. Jennifer Carter. They will want your full cooperation, of course, based on the evidence you presented today, especially those emails. I think there's a very good chance formal criminal charges will be filed. I'll cooperate fully, I assure him, taking the card. But I have to ask, is there any possibility of a plea bargain? I don't necessarily want to see Jennifer in prison. I just want to make sure she can't do this to anyone else, and I want to be able to see my grandchildren without constant drama. He's considering it. It will depend on the prosecutor and how willing Ms. Carter herself is to cooperate and accept responsibility. But given that this is technically a first offense, even with the previous pattern with her mother, a deal that includes probation, community service, and full restitution is likely on the table, especially if she agrees to psychological counseling and accepts the visitation orders without further challenge. That seems reasonable to me, I say. Despite everything she's done, she's still the mother of my grandchildren. And as much as I hate her right now for everything she's put me through, I don't want my children to grow up without their mother. He looks at me with that expression that conveys deep respect. That has always been your greatest strength, Judge Thornton. Your ability to be absolutely ruthless in administering justice while still maintaining compassion for the people involved. I sincerely hope you'll consider returning to the system in some capacity. Perhaps not as a full-time judge, but as a consultant or a teacher or something like that. We have many young professionals who would benefit immensely from learning from you. I'll think about it, I promise, though I'm not sure I will. For now, I just want to focus on rebuilding my relationship with my grandchildren and helping my son navigate what I imagine will be a very difficult divorce. He extends his hand and I shake it firmly. It was an honor to see you in action again, even under such unfortunate circumstances, he says. And please, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to contact me. When I leave his office and return to the hallway, I find David waiting. He's leaning against the wall, arms crossed, and when he sees me, he immediately straightens up. "Mom," he says, and then pauses as if unsure of what to say next. "Hey, David," I say softly, stopping a few feet away from him. "It must have been a difficult afternoon for you." He lets out a humorless laugh. Hard is one way to put it. "Mom, He pauses again, runs a hand through his hair, clearly struggling for words. "I read those emails the investigator gave you. I read every conversation between Jennifer and her friend. And I just can't believe I was so blind. How did I not see it? How did I let her manipulate me like that? You loved her, I'll tell you simply. And when you love someone, you want to believe the best about them. It's not a weakness, David. It's human." Tears begin to stream down his face. "She used you. She used our children. She took nearly $200,000 from you and then had the audacity to sue you when you only wanted to see your own grandchildren. And I stood by her side. I testified against you, Mom. I said terrible things about you in those preliminary hearings. How can you forgive me for that?" I step forward and place my hand on his arm. "Because you were a victim to David. Jennifer didn't just manipulate me. She manipulated you, isolated me from you, gradually convinced you that I was the problem. That's what people like that do. They isolate their victims, control the narrative, make you doubt your own perceptions and memories. It's not your fault you fell for it." He hugs me for a long moment, and I let him, allowing him to process his emotions. Finally, he pulls away, wiping his eyes. "I'm going to file for a divorce," he says. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm going to fight for primary custody of the kids. After what happened today, I think I have a good chance." "You do?" I agree. "Especially with the ongoing criminal investigations. But David, you need to be prepared. Jennifer won't take this lightly. She'll fight back. She'll try to manipulate you again. She'll try to use the children as weapons. You need to be strong. I know, he says, and there's a new determination in his voice that wasn't there before. And I'm going to need your help, Mom. Not just financially, though, God knows. I'll need that too when the legal fees start rolling in. But emotionally, the kids will need stability, and you've always been a constant in their lives, even when Jennifer tried to remove you. I'll be here, I promise, for you and the children. Always. We begin walking together toward the courthouse exit. The large double doors at the front are still open, and I can see the golden autumn afternoon outside. The trees lining the street tinged with vibrant oranges and reds. When will you be able to see the children? David asks as we descend the marble steps. They've been asking about you. Jacob especially keeps asking when Grandma Margaret will visit them again. As per the court order, immediately, I say, and I feel tears pricking my own eyes now. Can we arrange something for tomorrow? Maybe I can. Take you to lunch, or to the park, or just hang out at your apartment. Tomorrow would be perfect, he says, and for the first time since all this began, I see a genuine smile on his face. They're going to be so happy, Mom, and so am I. I missed you so much. The house felt empty without you. We walked to the parking lot together, making plans for the next day, discussing the next legal steps, gradually beginning to rebuild the bridge. Jennifer had worked so hard to burn. It won't be easy. There are months, maybe years of healing ahead. But for the first time in almost a year, I feel hope. Hope that we can fix this. Hope that my family, broken as it is now, can eventually become whole again. In the days and weeks that follow, the story spreads exactly as Justice Harrison predicted. Former Supreme Court Justice exposes family manipulation scheme, makes headlines in local newspapers. Television reports cover the story, some with anchors shaking their heads in disbelief as they describe the details. My photo, an old one from my time on the court that some clever reporter managed to find in the archives, circulates on news websites. But there's an unexpected silver lining. My email, which some reporters managed to find and publish, is flooded with messages. Hundreds of them. From people around the country, around the world, sharing their own stories of family financial abuse, of manipulation by daughters-in-law or sons-in-law or adult. Children of grandparents cut off from their families after giving significant amounts of money. I read every email, respond when I can, and provide resources when appropriate. I realize there's a silent epidemic happening, a problem no one is talking about because victims feel ashamed. Because our society tells us family is sacred, and we should do anything for them, because admitting you've been used by people you love is humiliating and painful. I begin working with a local advocacy group focused on elder protection. I use my legal experience to help others build similar cases, document abuse, and understand their rights. It's rewarding work, transforming my pain into something that can help others avoid what I went through. The criminal investigation against Jennifer progresses. In April 2024, she is formally charged with wire fraud and attempted extortion. The evidence is overwhelming, especially the emails and the history of the affair with her mother. Her lawyer negotiates a plea agreement. Jennifer agrees to pay full restitution. It's 2,000 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and mandatory counseling. In exchange, she avoids prison time. The divorce process is brutal, dragging on for nearly 8 months. Jennifer fights. For every inch, repeatedly attempts to manipulate David again, and even makes false allegations of domestic abuse that quickly fall apart under scrutiny. But eventually, in December of 2024, the final divorce decree is issued. David receives primary physical custody of the 3 children. Jennifer receives supervised visits twice a week for 3 hours, each, until she completes her counseling program and demonstrates consistent behavioral change. David and the children move to a smaller apartment closer to my building. I see my grandchildren regularly now, 3 or 4 times a week. Jacob, now 6, runs to hug me every time he sees me. Emma, 4, has gradually lost her shyness and now chatters happily about her school and her friends. And little Michael, now 3, and who barely knew me before all this, calls me grandma and climbs into my lap for stories. It's during one of these visits, a quiet Saturday afternoon when I'm reading to Emma while Jacob and Michael play with blocks on the floor, that David sits next to me on the couch. "Mom," he says softly, I can never thank you enough, right? Not just for paying for the lawyers, although that was huge, but for showing me how to get out of it, for giving me the courage to fight, for proving that we don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from someone who's supposed to love us." "You don't need to thank me," I say, running my fingers through Emma's hair as she cuddles against me. "You're my son. That's what mothers are for, to fight for their children no matter how old they are." Still, he insists, "I need you to know. You saved my life, Mom, and my children's lives. If you hadn't fought, if you hadn't exposed Jennifer, I'd probably still be in that toxic relationship, slowly being drained of everything that makes me who I am." I sit in silence for a moment, thinking about everything we've been through, all the pain and drama of the last 2 years. There were moments during those dark months of loneliness and rejection when I thought about simply giving up, accepting that I'd lost my family and moving on. But something inside me refused to accept that. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was decades of experience fighting for justice in courtrooms. Or maybe it was simply love, the deep, unconditional kind of love a mother and grandmother feels, the kind that refuses to die even when it's being actively suffocated. David, I finally say the most important thing I've learned from all of this isn't about law or evidence or how to build a case. It's about love. Real love, true love, isn't weak. It isn't passive. It doesn't silently accept abuse. Real love fights. It stands up for itself. It sets boundaries. And sometimes real love means taking someone to court to expose their manipulation, even when that person is married to your son and the mother of your grandchildren. He nods, digesting my words. I wish I'd understood this sooner. I wish it hadn't taken me so long to see who Jennifer really was. Don't beat yourself up over this, I say firmly. She was good at what she did. Manipulators always are. They don't start with obvious abuse. They start with love and kindness, making you feel special, making you lower your guard. And then so gradually you barely notice, they begin to isolate you, control you, drain you. Until the day you wake up and realize you've become a shadow of your former self. That's exactly how I feel, he admits. It's like I'm waking up from a 3-year nightmare. It's like I'm remembering who I used to be before Jennifer. And you will find this man again, I promise. It will just take time and therapy. Lots of therapy, he laughs. A genuine light sound I haven't heard from him in a long time. I've already started twice a week. A therapist specializing in emotional abuse and manipulation. Amazing mom. She's helped me recognize patterns I didn't even realize existed. All the little ways Jennifer controlled me made me question. My own reality isolated me from you and other friends and family. I'm glad you're doing this work. I mean it sincerely. And if at any point you need additional financial support for therapy, for the kids to go to therapy, whatever it may be, just let me know. It's not about money or wanting control. It's about wanting you and these kids to be healthy and happy. I know, Mom, he says. And this time I accept the help the way it should be accepted. With gratitude, not with expectations, not with implicit obligations. As gifts from someone who loves me, not as ropes to tie me down. In the months that followed, we gradually built a new routine, a new normal. Family dinners every Wednesday and Sunday. Walks in the park on Saturdays. Movie nights with popcorn and the kids in pajamas. Birthdays celebrated together. Holidays shared, the small, everyday moments that make up family life. Jennifer remains a peripheral presence, her supervised visits taking place in a neutral visiting center where a trained professional observes the interactions. I've heard that she's making progress in her counseling, that she's beginning to recognize and take responsibility for her behavioral patterns. I don't know if this change is genuine or just another performance, another attempt at manipulation. But honestly, it's no longer my responsibility to find out. What matters is that my grandchildren are safe, happy, surrounded by people who truly love them without hidden agendas. What matters is that my son is gradually healing, rediscovering his own strength and identity. What matters is that the truth has finally come out, that justice has been served, and that I can sleep at night knowing I did everything I could to protect the people I love. In August of 2025, almost 2 years after that fateful hearing, I receive an official envelope in the mail. It's from the New York State Bar Association. For a moment, my heart races, wondering if it's some kind of investigation or complaint related to Jennifer's case. But when I open it and read the contents, I discover it's something completely different. It's an invitation. The bar is organizing an award ceremony for retired judges who have made a significant impact on the state's judicial system. They're honoring me with a Career Achievement Award for my work over 28 years on the bench. The ceremony will be in 3 months, and they're asking me to accept the award and perhaps say a few words. My first reaction is to decline. I spent 5 years trying to live quietly out of the spotlight. Why voluntarily put myself back in it? But then I think about all the people who contacted me after my story became public. All those grandmothers, grandfathers, parents, aunts, and uncles being manipulated and abused by family members. All those people who finally found the courage to seek help after seeing they were not alone, that even a former Supreme Court justice could be a victim, but could also fight back and win. Perhaps accepting this award, perhaps using this platform to speak out about family financial abuse can help even more people. Perhaps my story, painful as it was to live, can be transformed into something meaningful that creates real change. So I accept the invitation. And when the night of the ceremony arrives in November 2025, I take the stage in a banquet hall filled with lawyers, judges, prosecutors, public defenders, all the legal professionals who make up our state's justice system. David is in the audience with the children, who are dressed in fancy clothes and behaving admirably well for small children at a formal event. As I accept the award and step up to the microphone, I look at the hundreds of faces staring back at me and feel a wave of emotion. These are my people. This was my community for so long. And though I've walked away, I've chosen privacy and peace, there's something deeply satisfying about being back, even if just for tonight. Thank you, I begin, my voice echoing through the PA system. It's a tremendous honor to receive this recognition from the bar. When I retired from the Supreme Court in 2018, I thought my work in the justice system was over. I thought I would spend my retirement years traveling, reading, being a grandmother, living a quiet life away from the pressures of making decisions that affect other people's lives. A pause, gathering my thoughts. But then I realized that you can't truly let go of entitlement, not when it's in your blood, not when you've spent decades learning to recognize injustice and fight against it. Because 2 years ago, I myself became a victim of family manipulation, of financial abuse, of someone who used my emotions and my love for my family as weapons against me. I can see people in the audience leaning forward, attentive. Some know the story, others are hearing it for the first time. My daughter-in-law, I continue, accepted nearly $200,000 from me for 3 years under various pretexts. When the money stopped, she cut me off from my grandchildren. And when I tried to reestablish contact, she sued me for harassment, fabricated evidence, persuaded witnesses to lie, and almost managed to get me legally barred from my own family. There are shocked murmurs around the room. She almost won, I say, because I, despite all my decades of legal experience, despite having seen every form of manipulation imaginable in my courtroom, initially didn't recognize what was happening to me. I was blinded by love, by hope, by my desperate desire to keep my family together. And I think that's the most important lesson I've learned from this whole experience. Anyone can be a victim. It doesn't matter how smart you are, how experienced, how educated. When emotions are involved, when it's family, we're all vulnerable. But the second lesson, and this one is equally important, is that victims don't have to remain victims. We have tools. We have the justice system. We have evidence and discovery and impartial juries when they work properly. And we have each other, a community of professionals dedicated to ensuring justice is served. I pause, letting my words sink in. When I walked into that courtroom as a defendant in a case I knew was built on lies, I made a choice. I could have been the defeated grandmother, the pathetic old woman begging for scraps of access to my grandchildren. Or I could have been who I really was, a woman who dedicated 3 decades of her life to uncovering the truth and serving justice. I chose the latter. And because I chose to fight, because I meticulously documented everything, because I built a case that could not be challenged, I won. Not only did I gain access to my grandchildren, but I exposed a pattern of predatory behavior that likely would have continued for years, affecting other victims. And that's why I'm telling this story today. Because there are thousands, probably millions of people across this country facing similar situations. Grandparents being financially exploited by adult children or daughters-in-law or sons-in-law. Elderly parents being drained of their life savings by manipulative children. And too often these victims suffer in silence because they feel ashamed, because our culture tells us we should always support family no matter what, because admitting that you're being used by someone who should love you is deeply humiliating. I need everyone in this room, especially the younger ones among you, just beginning your legal careers, to understand something critical: family financial abuse is real, it's pervasive, and it's devastating. And as legal professionals, we have a responsibility to take these cases seriously, to not dismiss them as mere family dramas, to recognize that someone who comes to you seeking help against a family member may be showing enormous courage just by being there. I lift the award, a heavy crystal trophy that catches and refracts the light from the ceiling fixtures. This award is for 28 years of service to the court. But I'm also accepting it on behalf of all the years since my retirement, when I learned that you can leave the bench, but you can never stop being a champion for justice. And I'm dedicating it to all victims of family abuse, especially those who are still suffering in silence, afraid to speak out, unsure if they'll be believed. I believe in you. This system believes in you. And when you're ready to fight, we'll be here to help. The room erupts in applause, a standing ovation that continues for minutes. I see tears on some people's faces. I see nods of recognition and understanding. And I see David in the second row holding Jacob and Emma, tears streaming down his face, but smiling, so proud. After the ceremony, I'm surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories, ask questions, and seek advice. I stay for hours talking to each person, listening, offering guidance where I can. It's exhausting but deeply meaningful. In the following weeks, the speech was transcribed and circulated widely. Elder advocacy groups invited me to speak. Law schools asked me to lecture on recognizing family financial abuse. Reporters requested interviews to discuss the issue more broadly. And little by little, I see change beginning to happen. Legislators in several states are beginning to propose stronger laws protecting seniors from family financial exploitation. Courts are beginning to take these cases more seriously, recognizing patterns and applying appropriate scrutiny, instead of simply assuming that families always act in each other's best interests. It's not a quick change. Systemic change never is. But it is real, tangible, meaningful change. And knowing that my pain, my struggle, my refusal to be silenced contributed to this change makes it all worthwhile. Now, as I write this in 2026, almost 3 years after that hearing that changed everything, my life has finally found a new balance. I see my grandchildren regularly. Jacob just started 2nd grade, is learning to read, and insists on reading stories to me instead of me reading to him. Emma started preschool and loves art, bringing home paintings and drawings that cover my refrigerator. Michael is speaking in full sentences now, making adorable little conversations about dinosaurs and trucks and anything that captures his imagination. David is dating again, a wonderful teacher named Sarah, whom he met through a mutual friend. She's kind, patient with the kids, and completely transparent about everything in her life. It's refreshing and wonderful to see my son with someone who truly values him without a hidden agenda. As for Jennifer, I heard she moved to another state and is remarried to an older man. I sometimes wonder if she's truly changed, if the counseling and legal consequences have created genuine transformation, or if she's simply found a new target, a new set of victims. But it's no longer my responsibility to find out or protect her. I regularly volunteer with senior advocacy organizations using my experience to help others build cases when needed. Recognize signs of manipulation and understand that true love should never cost everything you have. It's meaningful work that gives purpose to my retirement days. And through it all, I learned some fundamental lessons that I carry with me. I learned that strength isn't always about power or position. Sometimes strength is simply refusing to be erased, refusing to silently accept injustice, refusing to let lies become truth through repetition. I learned that family should be a source of love and support, not pain and exploitation, and that it's perfectly acceptable to set boundaries or even cut off contact with toxic people, even if they're related by blood or marriage. I learned that you're never too old to fight for yourself, never too weak to seek justice, never too insignificant to be heard. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that trauma can be transformed. It can be taken, that painful and horrific experience, and reshaped into something that helps others, that creates change, that leaves the world a little better than it was. If you're reading this, if you identified with any part of my story, if you've recognized patterns in your own life that make you uncomfortable, please know a few things. First, you're not alone. There are millions of people in similar situations suffering quietly, wondering if they're overreacting or being too sensitive. You're not. If something feels off, if a relationship feels unbalanced, if you're constantly giving while the other person constantly takes without reciprocating, your concerns are valid. Second, you deserve respect. It doesn't matter how old you are, how much money you have, or what your relationship is with the person hurting you. You deserve to be treated with basic dignity and respect. And when you're not being treated that way, you have every right to set boundaries, to say no, to protect yourself. Third, documentation is critical. If you suspect you're being manipulated or exploited, start documenting everything. Save emails, text messages, and call logs. Photograph physical evidence. Keep meticulous bank records. All of this will prove invaluable if you eventually decide to seek legal help. And finally, there are resources available. There are elder advocacy organizations in almost every state. There are hotlines you can call anonymously for advice. There are attorneys who specialize in these cases. There are therapists who can help you understand the dynamics of toxic relationships. You don't have to go through this alone, and you don't have to suffer in silence. My story had a relatively happy ending because I had resources, legal knowledge, and eventually luck in the form of a judge who recognized me and knew the allegations against me were false. But even without these specific factors, you can find justice. You can fight. You can win. You just need to have the courage to take the first step, to say out loud that what's happening is unacceptable, to seek help. And to the legal professionals who may be reading this, I have a request. Please take cases of family financial abuse seriously. Don't dismiss them as mere domestic drama. Don't assume that because someone is old or emotional, they're untrustworthy. Look at the evidence. Look for patterns. Ask the tough questions. Because sometimes the person sitting in your office asking for help is someone who has spent their entire life serving justice but now needs help finding it for themselves. If you identified with my story, please leave a like to help me reach more people who may be going through similar situations. In the comments, tell me, have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where your generosity was exploited, where your love was used against you? How did you deal with it? Subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. Stories of people who faced impossible odds but found the strength to rise again. What part of the story resonated with you the most? Share it with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who may be in a similar situation and needs to know that they are not alone, that there is hope, that justice is possible even when all seems lost. Always remember, you are stronger than you think. You deserve more than you're getting. And you have the power to change your situation no matter how impossible it seems now. All you need is the courage to take the first step. The rest will follow. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. Thank you for being part of this community where we can share our experiences, learn from each other, and support each other in difficult times. Together, we are stronger. Together, we can transform pain into wisdom, trauma into strength, and difficult stories into messages of hope that reach others, struggling in silence. You are never alone. There is always hope. And justice, though sometimes delayed, eventually comes to those who have the courage to fight for it. Until the next story.